Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbinic Intern, Adrian Marcos.
Tonight, we're going to be revisiting the parsha we just read, I don't know how many minutes ago, which is Vayera, but we haven't gotten quite to the part of the Akedah. So this is both a review and a preview. Man, I would never make it as a comedian. And what I want to revisit about it is the way that the story changes or might change depending on the commentators' views or through a re-examination of the grammar. You don't really need a Chumash because the relevant verses are on the page. But if you want to go further or deeper, you're always welcome to pick one up. I won't be offended. Just don't throw the book at me. So how this is going to work tonight is there are some questions on this page. We may not get to all of them. And, they're really just meant to be guiding questions. If you come up with something fantastic, let me hear it. Because I am learning with y'all just the way that y'all are learning with me. So I think we all know the standard story of the Akedah. God shows up to Abraham one day and is like, hey, I would like you to sacrifice your son. And Abraham, in complete contrast to the other two episodes in this parsha, is like, sure thing. And goes about his business and almost goes through with it until an angel of the divine is like, hey, you should stop that. Now, the commentators were, I think, like the rest of us, a bit troubled by the fact that Abraham was just so willy-nilly about it, especially because when, earlier in this parsha, what we just read was about Ishmael being sent away by Abraham, and there was a little bit of pushback there from Abraham. He's like, this is my kid. You can't really expect me to do this. And then the divine had to, kind of soothe things and be like, he'll be fine. We'll take care of him. He'll have his own great nation. He's just not going to be your heir. And then Sodom and Gomorrah happens, and Abraham's like, what are you doing? You can't just destroy a whole city because there still might be good people in there, and they have that argument, and ultimately it still doesn't go great for Sodom and Gomorrah, but Lot survives for the most part. So now we're in the Akedah, and following that pattern, you would expect Abraham to react the same way that he did when Sarah was like, get rid of Ishmael, or God was like, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because they're awful. You would have expected a little bit of pushback, and we don't get that. So I want to ask, before we really start getting into the meat and the potatoes of the commentary and what have you, just some thoughts as to why you think Abraham didn't push back this time.
So one story I heard growing up is that contrary to the literal verse which says God tested Abraham, Abraham was actually testing God. Abraham had no intention of sacrificing Isaac. He was going to go to the point of maybe raising the knife or moving it down, but was never actually going to sacrifice Isaac. And if nobody intervened, he would have no more to do with this God. Because a God that would say, hey, sacrifice your child for me, that's too far for him, and he would never have continued to do business, so to speak. I don't know where that comes from. It might be in a midrash. It might be somewhere else. I haven't found the source for that. But that is a story that I heard growing up, is that it's actually a role reversal. And that's why he was so willing to go along with it, because he was never willing to actually do the thing.
On the contrary, I think if Abraham went to the mountain, to the to place. He had the intention, maybe not intention to do, but he knew God much better. He wasn't going to disobey him, and he wasn't going to cheat him, but he knew that God said, your descendant will be big, and it will be from your son. And that was the only son he had. So in a way, he had confidence on God that he won't do, but he showed his responsibility that he will do. I always just think of Isaac, who is going to be in that situation, and still it's great that he kept his faith and his father, because he was in such a bad situation.
So that's actually, I'm going to bounce off that and then get to you, Seth, if you had a thought. So there is a word that appears in the second verse. I believe it was, actually it's in the first verse. It's right after Veha Elohim. It says Nisa, and that means test. So to that point, if you just look at the Peshat, the very basic meaning of the verse, it means that God was testing Abraham. And we do see this, there's a bit of a parallel to God and then the word Nisa appearing when the Israelites are grumbling over how they don't have water. You don't need to, it's one of the, I think it was Rashi who makes a comment that the reason it was a test is because you know it's a test is because the Israelites kind of got their butts kicked afterwards, and the test for them was they just needed to be polite to Moses, and they weren't polite, so they failed. But yeah, Seth.
Oh, sure. Two things, hopefully briefly. So I think in the ancient world, I might be wrong about this, but it seems like child sacrifice for a lot of cultures was the most effective way to get the gods for pagan worshippers to do what they wanted. Like in the Iliad, King Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter at the beginning, and then he ends up winning the war against Troy. In maybe Bamidbar, or I think Bamidbar, there's some pagan king who is fighting the Israelites and sacrifices a child and then puts the Israelites to flight in battle. And but besides that, I think that is kind of like what Rosemary was saying, that Hashem has already done a lot for Avraham. And so I kind of think in Avraham's place, he probably thinks he owes a huge debt to Hashem for, I'm going to create a huge nation from you. And like, what does he owe specifically? And Yitzhak.
Nice. I mean, not nice for Isaac, but that's a good thought. And the king who sacrifices a child, the pagan king who sacrifices a child, I just took an exam in this. It's in one of the books of Melachim, Mesa. He sacrifices his son to defeat the Israelites, and it unfortunately works. So, great. And on that not so bright topic, we're going to go into verse 2, because there's a verse that there's a tiny word that I highlighted. It kind of shows up on my paper. I don't know if it shows up on y'all's. It's called na. And I did the English translation for this verse, but I also looked at a bunch of other translations to see if anybody else translated that word, and they don't. It just kind of, like, we read it in Hebrew, but in the English it never really shows up as a translation. But God is like, if you read kach na and you translate the na, God is both commanding and pleading with Abraham. Like, the divine knows what is being asked, goes against literally everything he's asked Abraham before. So I thought that was an interesting grammar thing. The man in the sweater who looks very collegiate, and I don't know your name. Can you remind me, please? No, the guy next to you. Marshall. Marshall, I'm assuming that you studied ahead of time. Do you have any thoughts? Oh,
He wants to know your thoughts.
Well, why is now there?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, okay. When Moses is requesting God's assistance in healing his sister, he says, El na rafa na la. He doesn't say El rafa. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly here, kach na. Doesn't say kach et yichidecha et bincha asher ahavta. You're asking for something, and you want to be polite about the whole thing. You just don't suddenly rush into the request, but you're saying, please. Maybe that's what na means here. It's almost like a pause. Kach, please. You take et bincha, et yichidecha, asher ahavta. And there's these three elements here that he's specifically identifying him. We saw the same thing in Robert Alter actually pointed this out in his commentary on the parsha we read this morning. Parsha Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha, right? Me'artzecha, from your land. Me'moladetecha, from your birthplace. U'mebeit avicha. So there's this three grouping here, and we have the same thing here. So.
yes.
First of all, Adrian, you're never going to get to this anything past where we are right now. So give it up. The couple of things have always struck me. I especially like what Brian's interpretation, which I've taken as my own for many years. But two things strike me. One is we know that in the Quran we have exactly the same story, but it's with Ishmael.
Mm-hmm.
And Ishmael is Abraham's son, and he was actually Abraham's firstborn. So it could have possibly been interpreted when God tells Abraham, or when Abraham hears God telling him, to take your bincha, yecherecha, asher ahavta, and we know that he loved Ishmael from the story, that this is in fact Ishmael who is being sacrificed. I don't resolve it, I just leave it there. The other thing that strikes me, and has always struck me, from what Marshall has just said, we have in here at Yitzchak, V'lech lecha el eretz haMoriah. So it's the exact same wording that God gave to Abraham when he was leaving his father's home and then going to Eretz Israel to begin with, is the same wording that's here. The wording to leave his father's home there, and the wording to take your son. There's something here about father-son relationships that seems to me to be very deep. Sometimes you want to kill your son. I can tell you that's true. And sometimes you have to just leave your father. And that's also true.
I am actually going to bounce off of that, bounce off the parallels and these themes of three, so that we can actually move on to the big stage portion of the sheet. Specifically, I want to focus on verse 10, which is at the top of the second page. So you have three verbs, vayishlach, vayikach, and then lishchok. So stretch out, pick up, slay, which parallels it's a variant of three, but it sets a certain kind of pace, which creates a certain kind of image. This is not, everything else up until this point is very deliberate. They're traveling to the mountain, they collect wood, and even if you look just a verse before, you see that there is a deliberation. Abraham builds the altar, and then he's laying out the wood, and then he's putting Isaac on top. Again, everything is happening in threes. And now, to me, I love a good pattern, except for when it has a certain pace. And this is very, very drum beat, and then in verse 10, it's like there's no pause between any of these actions. It's all almost one fluid move, which is interrupted by the angel speaking in the next verse. But I want to get people's thoughts as to what feeling does this like very drumbeaty pattern, like 3-point pattern, evoke in people's minds. Yes.
So because it happened so fast, I think maybe Abraham failed the test, and was the angel was forced to intervene. I think maybe, in fact, if this was a test of Abraham, Abraham wasn't really supposed to do this. This is his son, through whom Abraham's legacy is going to flow, and presumably he knows that. And so he should have answered back. He should have said why or no, and he doesn't.
It's a great point. And there are some rabbis and commentators who do believe that Abraham, very, very similar to you did, that Abraham ultimately failed the test. And some evidence that's given is God never speaks to Abraham directly again after this. Even like when Abraham is being told stop, it's not God speaking, it's the angel who is, or what is it? The Hebrew is Malach Hashem, like an angel of the Lord or angel of God is speaking and intervening. I don't have the exact commentaries stuffed into they're on the back shelves in my brain right now. But I've always pictured that moment as God being just as horrified as the rest of the angels, being like, this is a guy who was pushing back against me, and now he's not. I'm going to jump to a grammar thing. We're going to go back to verse 9, because this is all about imagery and about, the motions that made up this test. And it says, it's on the 4th line, kind of towards the end. Vayasem oto. It's translated here as he, being Abraham, laid Isaac on the altar. But that the verb sum, that's the shoresh, sin vav mem, can mean to lay out or to put, but it also has the meaning of to take and put violently, which I think also changes the image if you read it through that context, and also contrasts with what happens later when the ram comes. There's not as much resistance because the ram is stuck in the thicket. Is that it? Thicket. So with that in mind, does the picture change for anyone else of Abraham, of Isaac going to this place and then, presented on the Mizbeach like a, no, that's not a good analogy. Just presented on the Mizbeach like a present, he's being, really forcefully put, or he could be being, let me rephrase that, he could be being put quite forcefully. And some of the commentators do make a note of that, which is why later on a couple of pages later, some of the commentators are like, well, he was 37, as if that makes it any better. Murder bad. So, yeah. Any thoughts thus far? Rabbi Chorny, looks like you've got some thoughts. Do you want the mic? I'm stuck.
The only thought that I had was about Vayasem, the most familiar place to me, both from the Torah and from liturgy for Vayasem, is in the threefold blessing, which is Vayasem Lecha Shalom, and that the priests are supposed to be placing peace upon other people. It's exact same conjugation, exact same verb. And so I'm thinking about the context of the context, and whether or not it's possible for that same placement to be something very different, particularly if we're talking about an idea or a concept. V'yasem lecha shalom, you can place peace, and when you place peace, it's going to be placing it, however you're placing it, it's metaphorical. But if you're going to v'yasem a person and then it's described in detail, maybe that physicality makes a difference. And so you're talking about something that could be more forceful, more violent. But I think it's important to think about the way that the story would be read in the context of the entire Torah, which would have people familiar with V'yasem lecha shalom. I don't know, maybe there's an inverted read there too, that maybe he placed it V'yasem lecha shalom. Maybe he placed him very gently and very peacefully, which is a more disturbing or distressing read.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, go ahead.
I like that, Rabbi Charney. If what you're saying is, in that verse, in verse 9, there's a gentleness and a peacefulness with which he is placing his son on the altar. And then what happens next? Vayishlach Avraham et yado. Now, I'm not sure, and you may tell me I'm wrong. Yishlach is to send out. I don't think it's usually used with movement of your hand. So it's almost as if it was disembodied from Abraham's body, having laid out his son so gently. Now he knows what he's supposed to do, at least according to some the pshat of the story, and he has to send his hand away from him to grab the knife. He's resisting doing it. The two verses are almost juxtaposed in opposition to each other.
I'm going to bounce off that because I did some reading today, or earlier today, because I like Midrashim. And there is a Midrash about Isaac. He's a little older, which, his age fluctuates throughout this depending on the commentator. But he, in this Midrash that I read, Isaac was the one who was actually at peace with everything that was about to happen. He goes as so far to tell his father, you need to tie me down like really, really well, because, I might flinch or you might flinch, and if that happens, then the knife won't shect me properly, and this whole sacrifice thing will be for nothing, which I think is, it's a distressing image as much as the rest of this, but it does kind of invert the picture a little bit, where and support Larry's notion that Abraham was divorced from himself as he was doing this, and he was still resisting, but Isaac was the one that's like, it's all good, Pops. I just thought that was an interesting factor to throw out there. Of course, there are other commentators who disagree with that, and posit that Vayasem was not the nicest thing, and that Abraham, had to trick his son first to get him up there, and then maybe Isaac wisened up for half a second, and Abraham saw that, and had to overpower his son to get him onto the Mizbeach and go through all of this. How much time? Rabbi Jorny, how much time do I have left?
3 to 5 minutes.
Okay. Coolio. So in these last 3 to 5-ish minutes, I do want to circle to the age component of this. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is a traditional understanding that Isaac was a teenager when this happened. Some of the rabbis are like, that's kind of horrifying, so let's make him 37. And then other commentators are like, well, we can't quite pinpoint his age, but he wasn't that old. Does shifting Isaac's age, older or somewhere in between, or just keeping him at the age of 13, does that change the tone of this story for anyone?
I don't think he was 37 because Abraham didn't die 120 years old, and he had Isaac 100 years old, so he won't be 137, right?
I think they based the math off of when Sarah died, because she was a certain age when she had Isaac, and then she died at another age that
I mean, the moment of the sacrifice, if he's 37, then Abraham will be 137. So anyway, it's easier to put a boy of 12 years old, 13 years old on the altar, and you can convince him saying you're going to see God or things like that. He will be calmer than 37 years old.
Yep.
For me, it changes the tone, but not by much. It goes from, if he's 37, it goes from disturbing to more disturbing if he's, 13. So, I mean, in that way, it does change the tone, but we're not out of a certain category. We're in the category of this is deeply troubling, this is deeply disturbing, and it only increases the level at which I am disturbed, depending on whatever age. So it both changes and doesn't change the tone. I'm still in the same wheelhouse, as it were.
Makes sense to me. Yeah.
This really doesn't answer your question, but the whole question of what did Isaac merit is raised here. If he's an adult, then you might say he's had a lifetime to be able to merit this reward or this punishment. If he's a young child, then obviously he hasn't had the opportunity to do so. So the age might matter in that respect. But the truth is, we know so little about Yitzchak to begin with. He's the one patriarch that we know practically nothing about.
Yep. One of the commentators, or maybe a couple of them, but at least one commentator likes to posit that this incident shattered the relationship between Isaac and Abraham pretty much irreparably, and the two never spoke to each other again. The counter to that is they never spoke to each other to begin with. But yeah, we know that Isaac goes up to the mountain with his father. We never read that he comes back. They either parted ways or Abraham just went away by himself, and Isaac was like, forget it, I'm staying here because it's clearly safer than leaving with you. And it's really up, the rabbis took it upon themselves to write midrashim to try to fill in the gaps, not to justify what happened, although some of them kind of do, but more to just make sense of what seems like a senseless act. Yes. Last comment.
So a comment and a question that you probably want to leave hanging in the air, which is, the comment is that almost immediately after this story, Sarah dies. And I think Midrash has it that she heard what her husband was about to do, and that was it. It was a bridge too far. The question is, it's such a troubling story. Why is it in the Siddur and meant to be read every day? And I don't know that there's a good answer to that, but there it is. It's obviously a very important foundational story for our people.
Yep. I don't have the answer, but that is a fantastic question. Hopefully this session sparked some thoughts that you'll take with you as we go into the new week and read this parsha in full. And maybe, you'll look at this parsha through a different lens and come up with questions that even I didn't think about and that aren't on the sheet. So thank you for your time, and hope this was somewhat informative and enjoyable despite the topic.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.